Hey, it's Math Man Dan. We're out in the real world looking for places that people use math in their job, but it turns out it's not too hard to find. And I'm here with Mike. We're actually at SeaWorld today. Not a bad place to be.
Ah, welcome.
And you are one of the trainers for some animals, and you also work with them, keep them happy and healthy. And right now, we're standing in a pool of beluga whales, right?
Yes, beluga whales. Yeah.
And you were talking to me about a little bit of the math involved in keeping these guys fed. Well, several of the animals on the park. So first of all, how much do these guys weigh?
Well, our largest beluga whale is just under 2,000 pounds, and that's about an average size for an adult male beluga whale. The girls are a little smaller, about 1,400 pounds.
The male, how much would he eat each day?
Our biggest male Nanook eats 50 pounds of fish a day.
Wow. So, I didn't realize how much goes into this, but there's quite a bit of math you guys are doing every day. In fact, you were in the kitchen a few minutes ago,
right,
and I saw a chart on your wall that has all the different animals listed and the total amount of food they get every day, right?
Yes.
And they're all different. So first of all, how did you come up with all those numbers?
Well, at SeaWorld, every animal gets what's called a base, and those were the numbers you saw. So that's the set amount of food they're going to get for the day, kind of like their lunchbox. And Nanook's is 50 pounds. But it's not all just one type of fish. For nutritional reasons, we use 4 types of fish: herring, mackerel, sardines, and capelin. And they get that in different amounts.
So on that board, I saw a total for each animal, and I saw splitting amongst the different fish. And so I guess part of the math you have to do is decide how that split goes. And you told me you were weighing in the nutritional value and fat content.
Exactly. For the same reason that you're not allowed to only eat cheeseburgers, the whales eat different types of fish for the different nutritional values. And depending on their age or their sex or their size, that can vary. So under that 50 pounds, there's going to be different percentages of, say, a high-fat herring. And that might be, for a younger animal, a big percentage of their diet. But for an older animal like Nanook, might come down a little bit. And then other types that carry different nutritional percentages we can add in, and so they get a variety in their diet.
So you might actually adjust these proportions according to their age?
Yes.
I see. And what's their favorite?
Their favorite is herring. That's kind of that's the double cheeseburger of the fish world.
All right, and then I also saw you had polar bears.
Right.
You had 3 polar bears, and they had 3 different weights of food. So why is that?
Well, the polar bears have a little bit different diet. They eat some other things like a biscuit food made for bears. They also get fish. They get pure fat, and they get some meat.
Pure fat.
Pure fat, yeah, it's their favorite. But throughout the year, polar bears' diets go up and down. So in the spring and fall, they eat a lot of food. In the summer and winter, not so much. So even our bears here at SeaWorld San Diego show that fluctuation. So the percentages of different things in their diet will come down. So it might be in the summertime, Charlie, our big male bear, is eating about 12 pounds. But in the fall, he might be eating close to 18, 20 pounds.
So on the one hand, you guys are always adjusting the totals, and that has to do with the season, and their age, sex, and you said they weigh the animals as well,
yes,
and that factors in?
Yeah, all the animals get weighed on a regular basis. It's one of the ways we can keep a good eye on their health.
Okay.
And by knowing their weights, we know what this animal should be. We know that Nanook, the beluga whale, should be around 2,000 pounds. So we can adjust his diet, more double cheeseburgers, the herring, so that he can put some weight on if we think he's underweight, or change to the tofu, the capelin, to bring him back down.
So every time you change their totals, you guys have to go redo the proportions of which foods they get.
Right.
So you are doing little math all the time, gauging how much to feed them all the time, I take it.
Almost every hour of my day has got math in it, whether it's divvying up food into different weights and amounts, adding and subtracting, to writing up notes at the end of the day on the animal's behavior and what they ate and totaling those numbers.
Just what I like to hear. Well, Mike, I got to tell you, I thought it'd be fairly simple feeding animals, but there was a lot more math involved than I would have expected, and I'm sure other people would agree with me on that. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for coming out.
And we're going to go check out some of these animals, but, back in the studio, maybe we'll show his chart and talk about these proportions he's had to work on. A little math every day for you, right?
Excellent.
I have to say those whales were really, really cool, but it was funny because he said that mackerel was their favorite, herring was herring, right? Yeah, herring was their favorite, and I don't know how they have a favorite because they don't chew the food. I got to feed them and they just gulp it down whole. I don't know, but anyway. So he was talking to us a little bit about what he has to do there, and one of the main things that I thought was interesting was they have to figure out the distribution of the different fish. And it depends on all these different factors. So they were talking about, how old the animal is, the seasons, whether it's male or female, et cetera, and their weight. And then they have to, divide amongst these 4 different kinds of fish they mainly get fed. Well, if you look, I actually have a chart here on my computer. You can see the chart we were showing there. If you look at the breakdowns, they're not all the same. For example, the first one, Nanook, right here, this is Nanook right there. he's the biggest one. He gets 50 pounds total, and he gets more mackerel than sardines, whereas the next one down gets more sardines than mackerel. So they have to weigh all this out, and it's not as simple as saying like, oh, well, this fish is all fat and this one's all protein. All these different fish have different levels of nutrients in them, and they have to somehow get the right balance to get the totals that they want. Well, if this sounds familiar at all from an algebra class, this is basically a mixture problem. So these are the kinds of problems you'd see in a class where, like, you're mixing different kinds of coffee and they cost different amounts or something like that. It's the same idea. So he might actually have to work on a system of equations to make that work. Another thing, though, that he had to keep in mind was once he figures out the proportions, they're getting adjusted all the time. So right now, the largest one is getting fed 50 pounds of fish a day, but that can go up or down depending on the seasons or other factors. So I thought we'd do a simple little example where we're going to try and adjust how much food Nanook gets fed, but we're going to try and stay in the proportions that have already been set up on that chart by Mike. So I picked on him because he was the biggest one, 50 pounds of food every day. I think he said he weighed almost 2,000 pounds, which is quite large. I can't imagine eating 50 pounds of food, but all right, so I wrote up Nanook's feeding schedule here on my computer, and we're going to try and make an adjustment. So let's say, hypothetically, we're going to put Nanook on a diet. So we're going to knock 8 pounds of food off of him every day. So if you weren't paying attention, you might think like, oh, I need to knock off 8 pounds of food. Well, here's the original chart. Let's just do this. There's, let's see, 28 pounds of herring. Well, let's knock 2 off there. I'll make that 26. And we'll knock 2 pounds off the capelin. That makes 8. 2 pounds off the mackerel. That's 5. 2 pounds off the sardines. That's 3. There you go. Knocked 8 pounds off, right? The problem is you did not keep the proportions that have been set up. So you can't do that. You can't just knock off equal amounts. So instead what we're going to do is figure out what his proportions were and then see what we actually have to do. So he really is working with proportions or percentages. So for instance, if you look at the herring, he's getting 28 pounds of herring. Well, that's 28 out of 50 pounds. Now you could reduce that as a fraction. So you could say he's getting 14/25 of his daily diet, is herring, or we could actually turn that into a percentage. That's 56%. Or if you go on a calculator, it's 0.56. So for the herring, that's really what's going on. He's getting 56% of his diet is herring. And you can do this for each one. So for instance, the next fish, which is capelin, is 10 out of 50. Well, that's 1/5, which is 20%. So 20% of his diet has to be this particular fish. The next one, mackerel, 7 out of 50. That's not the nicest fraction, but I did it on a calculator. It comes out to be about 14%. Not exact, but close. And the sardines, not their favorite, I guess, not mine either, is 5 out of 50. That's 1/10 or 10%. So if we decide to put this guy on a diet and knock his daily intake down to 42 pounds, we would need to go take percentages of each of these new guys and see what new totals we get. So for example, here's an easy one, the 10%. Well, I don't want 50 anymore, I want 42. So I'm going to change that to 42 total. 10% of 42 would be 4.2 pounds of sardines now. So we're not even removing a full pound of sardines, just slightly less. Another easy one, the 20% for the capelin there, 20% of 42 would be 8.4. Now the 56% on the first one, the herring, that's not the nicest one, but I did it on a calculator. It's about 23.5 approximately. And the mackerel, not the nicest percentage either, but it comes out to be about 5.9. So look what happened. You knocked off, let's see, 4.5 pounds of herring and less than a pound of the sardines, and that's how you would keep his proportions correctly. So you talked about keeping all these things in balance. These are all the kinds of proportions he has to keep track of every day. And he said he also keeps records of all this stuff. Anyway, it was great fun feeding the whales, and we're lucky we live in San Diego County. We have all these things available to us. I highly recommend going to visit those guys if you can, because they're really amazing creatures. And hey, you'll think of all the math involved when they get fed, right? You'll be jealous of the herring they get to eat. No. Mathman Dan here. We're running around today looking at how people use math in their jobs, or the real world, and how's this for a job? We are at Legoland. This is Eric. He's one of their master model builders. So here at Legoland, what do you do all day? What do you spend your time doing?
We design and plan the models that go into the park. In Legoland, California, we have over 50 million bricks that comprise all the different models in the park. We have models of giraffes, life-size elephants, down to 4-piece pigeons in our Miniland area. And the Miniland area is where I specialize in, and that's where we recreate different cities out of Lego.
So you're taking all these famous buildings and making
Yeah.
smaller versions of them out of Legos, completely out of Legos.
Absolutely.
All right, I think I want your job. But anyway, okay, so you were actually showing us a little bit about an actual building you're working on now, or have been working on.
Yeah, it's a recent project of mine that is just finished, and I have some samples here that I can help demonstrate some ideas.
So where building are these coming from?
Okay, this is pieces and parts of the Burj Dubai, which is out in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. It is now the world's tallest structure already, and it's not even finished. So you can imagine how tall it is. It's 2,650 feet high, almost a half mile.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I've seen this building, and I'm going to show pictures of it later because it is a beautiful building. It's very, very
It's
impressive.
like a giant spire. It is. It's
It's amazing.
it's unique.
So you get the task of making a smaller version of that. So I know one of the things you told me you had to deal with right off the bat is scale.
Yeah, scaling is very important in my job. Everything we make is a model of something else typically. So we really need to capture the essence of that. And by doing that, we have to figure out the scale. And that means retaining the proportions and making it look like what it's supposed to look like.
So for example, what scale, do you know what scale this building is?
Yes, the scale of this building ended up being 1 to 147. So which it translates to being 18 feet high. So if you
Okay.
took 18 times 147, this model would be the same height as the actual building.
So why 147? This was kind of an odd number to pick.
Well, in this case, the Lego itself, it kind of helped dictate where floor breaks are and just the design and how things came together. So it ended up fitting the size that was given to me as a goal to achieve.
So it wasn't just a matter of like, I want it to be 18 feet high. You had to think about other things as well, like how the
Absolutely.
bricks themselves fit.
Yeah, and how it all comes together in the middle and the bracing and the structure inside and everything. So.
Got it. And I saw you have a little helper here for some of your scale issues.
Yeah,
What do we got here?
This is a proportion scale. It's great for easily figuring out scales. You basically figure out on the outside ring what your original size is, or the reproduction size you want, and then the inside is the original. And you can rotate it easily to just get your proportion right there.
So already taking shortcuts with the math, but
Makes my life a little bit easier that way.
I understand. Okay, so another thing you were telling me about, and I didn't think about this at first, but it makes sense, is you have to try and estimate how many bricks you need to get sent to you, right?
Brick estimation for any project is essential too. Obviously we don't want to have too few bricks, and we don't want to have a huge excess because that's wasting budget money.
I mean, I see tons of bricks around here. We're surrounded by thousands of them, it looks like to me, but I mean,
Yeah, millions.
with something like this, okay. Something like this, I'm sure you need a certain number of certain kinds. So you're
Yeah.
talking about the little windows here.
Yeah, absolutely. In the case of this building, it being so tall, we knew that it would be in need of lots of these little 1x2 trans pieces. There are 3 of them per stack, and so what I had to do is figure out on each floor how many windows were on each floor, but this is a very tricky building because it tapers in and spirals as it goes up. So what it ended up being ultimately is this ridiculously long algebraic equation looking thing. But it worked in the end, and in the order I made, I think we were 34,000 of these in the long run.
How close were you?
I think it was just a little over 1,000 off. So
It's not
pretty
too
close,
shabby.
Pretty close. We went, and I rounded up because we wanted to make sure we had enough.
All right, now did you have to build this building all yourself, or did you have helpers?
Well, I designed it. It took about 3 weeks, but to actually build it, for one person to build this, it probably would have taken 6-8 months to do.
Really?
Yeah, and we didn't have that kind of timeline.
Wow.
So there was a team of about 5 of us at the busiest point.
So once you make the plans ahead of time, there's certain patterns you can, give off to somebody else. and
Yeah,
they can help out.
absolutely. Like this prototype here would show each section, and I'd say repeat this pattern until you get up to this floor, and then it jumps in.
And there's definitely, I see the patterns. They're the same, but they shrink as you go up around the building.
Yes, it was a very unique footprint of a building, shall we say. It doesn't have a straight line in it. So as far as Lego friendly goes, this isn't a Lego friendly building. So it was even more challenging at that
Yeah.
level.
All right, now one last thing. You told me that you were not the biggest math fan in high school.
Yes, in high school, I honestly did not like math, and I wish I would have taken lots more, because now in this position where I'm at, I could really apply it. And I used to ask my teacher, I'd be, where am I going to use this later in life? And he'd try to give real life examples, and they are always just not that good. And now looking back, I really wish I would have gone, calculus, physics all the way.
Now look, here you are using math all the time, right?
Daily.
Thinking mathematically all the time,
Yeah.
at least.
Spatially and mathematically and it never stops.
That's right, it ended well. All right. Eric, thank you so much for showing us a little of the math involved. I'm going to play around with these Legos for a little while, but back in the studio, I'll show you some pictures and we'll see what all this guy had to go through to make these buildings. Thank you very much for your time. We will see you again.
All right.
All right, how's that for a fun job? He gets to go play with Legos all day at his work. You know, I had a really good time talking with Eric, and it's not just because I love Legos myself, but you know, he was really sincere when he said he wished he'd learned more mathematics before he started doing this for his job. And it's not like he's out there solving equations every day. It's like he's thinking mathematically every day at his job. And that's one of the things, if you train your brain mathematically, if you do take some mathematics classes, it trains you to analyze and problem solve in certain ways, and they're paying off for him in his job, or they would have paid off more, especially, he said, if he would have taken more classes he's wishing he had. But if you think about the things he mentioned, again, it's not like he's sitting down with pencil and paper every day working on math equations, but he's dealing with scales, he mentioned, and he had to choose a scale for this particular project that depended on not only on, you know, what approximate size he wanted, but also on the geometry of the bricks. He had to factor that in and come up with a scale that would ultimately be the best fit for both concerns. He also talked about forming parts of the project, and they got smaller, but they had to keep the same proportions, so he had to deal with that idea, and then especially so he could make designs to hand off to other people to help him out. And he talked about estimation, where he had to estimate how many bricks to order. This comes up in all kinds of jobs where people have to make good estimates of things. And it's all examples of thinking mathematically, and he said he does it every day. Well, I had a great time there looking at all these models. If you're in the area, I definitely recommend it because they really are impressive. I mean, these guys are pros. I did mention during the interview that I would show a couple pictures of the building he was working on because it is an amazing building called the Burj Dubai. So first of all, if you don't know where Dubai is, I have a little map on my computer here. This is actually, it's in the Middle East. So we're going to zero in on it right there. And if I'll get a little closer map for you, if you can see that. It's basically next to Saudi Arabia, across the Persian Gulf from Iran. And this is an artist's conception of what it will look like when it's done. It's actually not done yet. It's almost done. It's got about another year. Here's a few other photos of it. It looks like it's nearing completion, but you can see at the top, or if you can see in the photo perhaps, there's still some cranes up there working on some stuff. Here's a picture during construction. Maybe you can get a sense of how tall this thing really is. It just dwarfs the other buildings around it. Here's another picture off to the distance. You can see how large it is. And another construction picture. I mean, the other buildings around it are very large themselves. This thing is just monstrous. Here's a comparison of the heights, and the second building from the left is the Empire State Building, which at one time was the largest building in the world. Well, not anymore. The third building from the right is the CN Tower, which was the largest building, if you will, before this. And then right next to it is a mast antenna, which was actually larger, but wasn't really a building, it's just a structure. But this thing, of course, takes the prize on everybody. I found some cross sections, and our friend Eric at Legoland actually had to use these to help him design his Lego version. Here's one cross section that shows the unique shape of the building. But then I also found a huge picture here, and he had one like it, where it goes up the building, and you can see cross sections on the left that are changes that goes up. So he was looking at all these different cross sections and trying to put these on graph paper, basically. He's looking at the area of them and trying to match it as best as he could with the Lego-sized bricks. So again, he really was thinking mathematically. He had to sit there with graph paper and work out how the geometry of this would best fit what the tools he had to play with. One more photo for you, well, two actually. This is his actual finished Lego product. It's now in Dubai, this one in particular. And here's a picture of it. This is a great picture. I'm going to zoom in on it because this is the Lego version, but in the background is the real thing out the window. So there's his Lego one, and you can actually see in the background, right on the left there, the real thing. Even though it's not quite done, they finished the Lego version first. I guess that was a good thing. We're in the model building shop of Legoland. This is Eric, one of their master model builders. And you know, I got to look around a little bit, and you've been making amazing models of these buildings and all kinds of things around here. And yet here we are with just some round balls. These are going to be for Christmas balls, right?
Yep, those are for our giant Christmas tree.
Okay, these captured my fascination for a mathematical reason. I'll tell you that in a second.
Okay.
First I want you were explaining to me a little bit about scaling, and in fact, for mathematical concept here, there's a certain ratio you guys have to keep in mind when you build all this stuff.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. A lot of people think that Lego is square, and actually a Lego brick is not square. It is rectangular, and from the front, it's got a ratio of 5 to 6 units.
Yeah, I can see it's not quite square.
Yeah, it's slightly rectangular. So that's something that we have to deal with every day in our designs.
So I noticed that, for example, if you keep that ratio correct, you can actually turn pieces sideways and make them fit, because if you make the measurements match up to that ratio.
Absolutely. You can achieve some really neat detail stuff that you couldn't otherwise without being able to understand that ratio.
In fact, I found this funny. You have Lego rulers here.
Absolutely. It helps helps measure anything in Lego without having to count it. We have this is a vertical ruler, and then we have a horizontal ruler because, like I said, they're
different scales because of the 5 to 6
absolutely
ratio. Okay. So, and what is this guy you've got going here?
What this is a prototype of, it's actually a pith helmet.
Like a safari helmet kind of thing?
Exactly. We have the little Lego people, the little minifigs, and this is a pith helmet for one of our Lego friends, which is a giant Lego, you know, with the little hands.
Yeah.
This is a hat for one of those guys. So, yes, and what I've got here, this is the graph paper. It's actually Lego graph paper.
Yeah, I can see it's not square.
Yeah, it's rectangular, and it has each block broken into the 3 plates that would actually comprise the height of one Lego brick.
And here's a side view, so same kind of thing.
Exactly. So I took an actual photograph of the little miniature helmet and then blew it up to the size I needed it, and then applied the Lego graph paper to get a starting point.
And this would help you figure out how to start making the frame for it.
Absolutely.
It's not just round. It actually has some like general curving to it.
It's got a lot of strange volume to it, and it's not a flat brim, and it kind of curves funny. So what I had to do is capture that gentle curve, and all with square or rectangular pieces. So it's quite a challenge.
So you told me you didn't take a calculus class,
Yeah,
right?
I never took calculus. I wish I would have.
Well, okay, I'll tell you the reason why I walked by this and wanted you to show it to everybody. This is exactly a calculus concept. What you had to do was you had to create a curved shape out of square pieces.
Absolutely.
Roughly speaking, rectangular pieces.
Yes.
And in calculus, this is the way that we learn to actually compute exact volumes. What we do is we make approximate version first out of all square things, because it's very easy. I mean, if you had to, you could take this all apart and you can measure the volume of each little piece because they're just rectangles.
Absolutely.
It's length times width times height. Easy,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
A little tedious,
Yeah.
but easy. And the idea of calculus is you do that, and then you make it better and better and better by using smaller and smaller pieces, and they look more and more round, and
To
eventually
fill in the gaps.
Exactly. Eventually, it look like the exact thing you want.
I now know calculus.
You do know. You know there are several big concepts in calculus. That is one
neat.
of them.
I didn't even realize that was going on.
But it's literally what you are doing. You are making a, if you will, a blocky approximation to a curvy thing.
Right.
And that's exactly what we do in calculus.
That's exactly what we do at Legoland.
Well, there you go. So this has been a very good visit for me. So.
All right. Yeah. This was a fun project. That's for sure.
Eric, thank you so much for
more
showing
than
us a little
welcome.
bit of the math around Legoland.
Happy to do so.
We'll look forward to seeing some more in the future. And you know, in the studio, I will show you a little more precise on what exactly is going on here. This really is an exact picture of what calculus is trying to make us do when we compute volumes. All right, back in the studio. All right, that was good fun talking to our friend Eric there. And I actually brought two main things he talked about. One was the ratios, and one was the calculus idea. So first of all, the ratios. He lent me some Legos. So this is probably too small to see, I realize, but one little brick with just one little knob on top, he was saying is a 5 to 6 ratio. So he has to keep that in mind when he's building designs. And so if you had like a little square block, this would be the size of a square block you might have played with as a kid. And I have actually formed this from 3 separate pieces because they make pieces that are cutting that into thirds. And so to make this actually have the same height as its width, you would have to add 2 more layers to this because of the 5/6 ratio. So this is actually 2 side by side of those basic size, if you will. So this is sort of like rather than a 5 to 6 ratio, it's like a 10 to 6 ratio or 5 to 3. And then if we go and put these 2 extra layers on top, you actually create something. So I kind of like added 2/3 of the shape to it. And he made this for me. You can actually see that it fits in correctly this way. And then if you turn it sideways like that, it fits in also. He's formed a perfect square because he has the same height as the same width. But to do that, he had to keep those ratios in mind, and he has to do this all the time when he's making these models because they have to do really creative things with the pieces, you know, get them going sideways and get things to fit into other little holes and et cetera, et cetera. So, all right, I also wanted to show you the calculus concept that we were talking about at Legoland. So I have here a nice little 3D graph. Now, this is something you would see in a second year calculus class. It's a graph, it's a surface, not just a curve, and the goal would be to find out the volume underneath this surface, and you would have an equation for the surface. And the whole technique of calculus is, let's go ahead and make an approximation to it first. So in this case, what you would do is you'd divide up, I did 16 little rectangular columns there, and you would have each of those columns go up until they hit the surface roughly. And you could easily compute the volume of each of these things one at a time, then add up the result, and you would have not the exact volume of the under the surface, but you would have the volume of this sort of blocky representation of it. And this is kind of like what Eric was doing with that helmet he was showing us. Well, it's an approximation, but calculus really wants an exact answer. So how do you make it better? Well, you increase the number of these columns. You want more and more columns. They each get smaller and smaller, thinner anyway. And the computations would get much more tedious, of course, but it's possible, right? Tedious but doable. So I'll show you what we're going to step it up a notch here, and I now have, this is 64 columns, and I'll put the surface on it. You can see that they are coming up to the surface, sticking a little bit above it, a little bit below it. They're not quite there. Now I'm going to make some more columns. This is 144 columns. You see it matches up a little closer. This is 256. Just continually increase it a little closer. This is, how many is that? A lot, over 400. It looks a little better still. 32 times 32 on that one, and finally one more. This is 1,600 columns. I'll put the surface on there. You see it's matching up pretty close. So you might be thinking like, well, I don't want to take 1,600 columns and sit there and figure out the volume of each of them and add them all up. No, you don't. Luckily, calculus has a shortcut for this. And not only do they have a shortcut for that, they have a shortcut for determining what would happen if you continued this process indefinitely. So like you just kept doubling the number of columns over and over and over until you can imagine like an infinite number of columns. It can figure out that target number, which will exactly match the true volume under that thing. So you might think, okay, so what? So calculus can come up with a volume under this wavy surface thing. What good is that for? Well, it can do a lot of things for you. For example, it can help you figure out things like average temperatures. If that was a graph of a temperature over a region, like a state or a country, it can actually lead you to the average overall over all the terrain of the average temperature. That's not too easy to come up with, without these kinds of techniques. You can also do things like the average rainfall, for instance, in an area. You can do some things of a little more physics nature, like find the center of gravity of an object. And you can even do things with probabilities where that graph will represent the probability of something happening. And by finding the volume underneath it, you can actually figure out, say, the volume that your car tires will last, the probability rather that your car tires will last between 20 and 40,000 miles, let's say. Let's say they're guaranteed for 30 and you want to see what's the chances I'll get from 20 to 40 out of them. You can actually use calculus like this to figure things out. So I know that's far more than our friend Eric was showing us, but it is related actually to what he was doing. He was doing, if you will, rectangular approximations to curvy things, and he was playing with the ideas of shape and volume. So, all right, it was a good time over there, and as I've recommended before, Legoland's really cool if you can get over there, if you're lucky enough to live near us and have it almost in your own backyard.